Hello, my friends. How about a bonus episode this morning? What if there were a newsletter for people who are pissed off about the climate crisis? Well, guess what? There is. It's Heated.world, and it's written by my friend Emily Atkin, who joins me on today's episode of Can You Talk Real Quick? This is where I reach out to a great source, analyst, journalist, smart person to talk about something that's happening, pretty relevant usually, and have them help them explain it here on the show to all of us. So I wanted to make sure that I did that at least once, if not more, during the COP28 climate conference. And there's nobody better to do it than to Emily Atkin, who's writing all about it. One of her latest is COP28 Sucks, Pay Attention Anyway. And this morning they dropped a really important piece titled, It's Official, COP28 has more fossil fuel lobbyists than ever. Emily talks about both of those articles and a lot more, as well as her partnership with the Now This video channel, bringing her articles to life in short-form videos on TikTok and YouTube. It's awesome. I just watched one, and I'll include it here at the end of the episode. Emily Atkin is widely respected as a journalist, and specifically even more so as an environmental reporter and writer. She launched Heated back in 2019, and you should go subscribe. Heated.world. It's so good. She's doing great work. She's been able to hire another journalist, Ariel Samuelson, who's been on the show, is working with her now. Previously, she was a reporter at the New Republic and ThinkProgress. She's been a contributor to the anthology All We Can Save. She's a columnist at MSNBC, and she's a journalist who was trained by some of the best journalists out there. Her mentor was the late, great Wayne Barrett at the Village Voice in New York, and she was a research assistant for him. Anyway, I can't say enough good things about her. I hope that you'll go pay for a subscription to her Substack newsletter. If you're not already subscribing for free, definitely do that now. Heated.world, everybody. Check it out, favorite it, make sure you follow and support her, you know, because she's saving the planet. All right, let's do it right now. Emily Atkin, can you talk real quick?
There she is now, Emily Atkin, one of the best journalists of our time. I guess it's all downhill from that compliment.
That's me, amazing journalist, Emily Atkin, here to talk about my amazing journalism.
There you go. Heated.world. Amazing journalism. I can't believe that's not the tagline. Heated.world. Amazing independent journalism.
Amazing independent journalism by the best journalists of all time. Thank you, Pete.
Perfect in other ways outside of journalism also.
Not great personality, but good work.
Has an aversion to vegetables, but other than that...
Well, let's not talk about that.
Fossil fuel lobbyists are pouring into COP28, and it's in Dubai, and the guy running it is an oil and gas executive, and he's already made shady deals, and you wrote the piece that had to be written, which was you really wanted to look away, but I guess our privilege means we can't.
No, actually, it's people don't know this, but you are required by law to pay attention to the climate conference in Dubai. So that's like a law that you have to follow, or else you go to jail. So that's why we're writing about it. Also, the fact that it is, you know, we have essentially 5 years left remaining in our carbon budget in the world before we reach the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold of dangerous warming if we keep emitting the same way that we've been emitting. So that's like also another reason to pay attention. But yeah, no, it's full of fossil fuel lobbyists more than ever, actually, more than there have ever been. We actually haven't published the story yet, but I'm positive by the time that you will publish this interview, it will be out. So I feel comfortable telling you this. So this year we got access to like an embargoed early analysis that came out of the number of fossil fuel lobbyists that are present at the conference this year. And it's 2,400 fossil fuel lobbyists, which is like, I think it's about 3 times as many as there have ever been. Like in previous years when organizations have tallied the number of fossil fuel lobbyists at the UN climate conferences, it's been like 600, 700, which is like a lot, you know, like that's more than any country's delegates that they send, except for like 2 or 3 countries. But this year it's like exploded, in part because of the UAE's presidency and like as you said, the president of COP being a fossil fuel executive. And then also because they implemented new disclosure rules that say like you have to disclose who you're working for when you come to COP. You can't like just choose not to disclose. So we just know more this year. And it's like a bonanza of fossil fuel lobbyists this year. So that's great.
Well, what is kind of supposed to happen? This is the 28th conference like this, and we can talk about the things that have been agreed upon and the triumphs and obviously the charade of it all as well, and the travesty of what hasn't gotten done or how long it's taken and all the corruption involved. But kind of who's supposed to be going, what is supposed to be happening at these conferences? Because when you talk about how many lobbyists are there, it begs the question, well, what is happening at these conferences? Who are they for? Who gets to go? Yeah.
Who is in charge of this party? It's funny because it's called the Conference of Parties, and we were looking through the attendee list, looking for fossil fuel lobbyists and finding like the CEO of Exxon, CEO of Chevron, right? CEO of BP, the CEO of the company that the Mountain Valley Pipeline is under. And we were just like, this is the worst party ever. Like, I wouldn't want to, who is in charge of this party? But no, the reason that we have these things is because of the nature of climate change, essentially. It's because climate change is this really global problem that is it's unequally distributed, and also like the countries that contributed to the most don't have all the impact. So like in order to solve it, you really have to get like everybody into the same room. It's sort of like this is just off the top of my head. It's kind of like an HOA, right? It's like you have a building and there are like issues in the building, but like somebody installed a like really, really high powered air conditioning and it's raising the electric for the entire building or something like that. Or it's, causing power outages throughout the whole building. And like other people are like not using the electric. They didn't contribute.
There's a whole bunch of townhouses, and this one guy has his Christmas tree lights like burning like the sun, and he's got 17 space heaters and 15 screens. He's using all the energy while the rest of us are using little to none, and yet we're all, I think I'm just punching up the analogy.
We're all paying for it? Like, I don't know why.
Right.
Something like that, right? So that's why these things exist, is because like you essentially need a global forum to solve this problem in a truly equitable, but also like efficient and effective way, right? Like if you act on your own, it's one of these things that's really annoying about climate change, is that if you just act on your own and nobody else, like country-wise, is on board with you, then it's not like you're doing it for nothing, but it's not going to be as effective as if you worked together. So a lot of what the purpose of a COP is for not only countries, but people in the business sector from all over the world that are particularly in high emitting sectors or sectors that are very affected by climate change, but don't necessarily emit a lot, to come together and have a global stage to talk about what they need or how they need to change and come to agreements, right? And so in a perfect world, like it would make sense that the fossil fuel industry and a lot of its lobbyists and representatives would be there, because this is a conference about how to solve climate change, and fossil fuels are the number one cause of climate change, right? So like, obviously, why wouldn't members of the fossil fuel industry be there? The problem is that every single time the fossil fuel industry has sent lobbyists to things, whether it be COPs or government meetings in the US and the UK, like around the world, climate policy tends to get delayed, killed, completely filled with things that make it ineffective. It's like a poison pill. It's just the reason that it's so egregious at this point is that there has never been a time that there have been a ton of fossil fuel lobbyists at an event for climate policy, and like really good climate policy has come out of it.
Surprising, shocking, in fact, that's the case. But of course, that's the case. And that's to some extent how the world works. But yet it's the world that we do exist in, and I think you said it and others have said, it's the only forum to get what we need to get done. There isn't necessarily a better place and space. And I think you quoted Bill McKibben talking about how important it is that we pay attention to this and put pressure on the stakeholders. But what about the U.S. representation? Why isn't President Biden going? I think I read the vice president is going, Kamala Harris, and I did see a quote from the climate envoy, Jon Kerry, former Senator Jon Kerry, that was pretty vociferous about coal. He said he's militant against coal now. You know Jon Kerry, you've interviewed him for Heated, and I don't know what reaction you have to the U.S.'s presence or what our leadership should be, or maybe absence, one might argue.
I tend to believe that the U.S.'s presence at these events is symbolic of their willingness, at least partially, symbolic of their willingness to accept responsibility for this global problem that the U.S. has primarily caused. So, when you're at a COP, it's not, the U.S. might be among the most powerful countries there, among the most wealthy nations there, but also they're on the same stage as nations that are literally sinking into the ocean, right? Nations that they want to now start developing economies, right? Like more advanced economies. And they're being told there are certain ways that they can't do that now because of climate change. And they can't do that while they're also experiencing the effects of climate change. And what is the reason for that? Primarily the United States, the largest historical emitter of any country. The United States, not only the largest historical emitter, but one of the wealthiest and most developed nations. So we're already developed. We've already reaped all the benefits of emitting massive amounts of carbon into the atmosphere while shifting the cost and the burden onto all these other countries. Yeah. So when I see, the president is too consumed, quote, with other global crises to attend the COP, yes, perhaps, climate envoy Jon Kerry can handle everything himself. But it's sort of a symbolic middle finger to say, to these other countries, particularly when, as I mentioned earlier, we only have 5 years left before the carbon budget runs out, before we reach 1.5 degrees Celsius. It's sort of just like saying, I know that this is primarily our fault, but I got other stuff going on, so I can't come here and make a statement. And so there are people that'll have different views about that. I think it's long overdue that someone like Kerry would come out as militant against coal. I think it's great. I mean, it's sort of like everything when it comes to climate change that I see about good things, quote unquote, good news about climate change, where it's that's good, but it would have been way better 20 years ago. It's good, but not enough, right?
Right.
So it's just super safe thing at this point to say that coal is the devil and I'm against coal. Coal was the devil this whole time. What we're dealing with right now and what is the huge issue is not really coal, because it's the expansion of oil and gas. Coal is already sort of on the way out. Yeah, we need to close it and that's fine, but that shouldn't be a headline statement. I'm trying to think of something else that's really obvious that someone would say that why would you give them a headline for that?
Nazis are bad.
Yeah. Oh my God. Hitler was wrong.
Well, apparently there's rising questions about that amongst the frightening constituency of people that have power. So coming out of COP28, one big headline I saw, oil companies pledge to slash methane pollution, but critics call it a smokescreen. I almost want your opinion on that headline, and then I wonder if you can guess who it comes from, but it's PBS. Oil companies pledge at COP28 to slash methane pollution, but critics call it a smokescreen. Are you up on that development from a day ago?
I'm actually not, so okay. I don't know. Can you tell me?
Well, that it's just not nearly enough, that they're talking about, I think it's oil refineries limiting flaring that they do, which lets off a tremendous amount of methane. And then activists are saying, yeah, that's great that you're going to limit flaring. But when we look at the math, that's about blank point percentage of methane's releases. So we appreciate your big announcement, but it's not nearly enough limiting of what is, I believe, thought to be the most pernicious, dangerous for several reasons of the greenhouse gases. Methane, real bad one. So not enough, I guess, is the shortest take.
That's true. That flaring is not your number one source of methane emissions from oil and gas. However, the reason that it could be seen as really significant is that companies can measure the amount of methane that they are losing from flaring. So it can look like a really, really great cut if they're able to cut that methane. Like, look, we were losing this much methane, and now we're able to cut like 90% of the methane that we were losing from flaring. But that's because what we don't really have good data on is the methane that is lost from leaks from the oil and gas infrastructure,
right,
and particularly like the pipelines. So oil and gas companies will look at their whole database and data set and say, like, look, we're cutting 90% of our methane emissions by reducing flaring. It's like, no, you're cutting 90% of your recorded methane emissions from flaring. But independent scientists have shown that we're undercounting methane emissions from oil and gas operations by like 3 times as much. You'll have to check me on that, but it's somewhere around there. Like the amount of undercounted methane emissions from oil and gas operations that companies just like don't even say that is happening is like wildly high. It's enough so that some research has said that with undercounted methane leaks from oil and gas infrastructure, not just flaring, oil and gas operations are as bad as coal emissions wise.
Right. I mean, I've seen those analysis and people miss them, but I'm glad that you mentioned it that way because it's the aggregate is the only way to look at these things, and anybody can cherry pick. This announcement about methane, according to the president, this oil and gas exec who you've been covering, Sultan Al Jaber, if I'm pronouncing it right, he said about this, to be fair, he said, is it enough? Hear me out, please. No, it's not enough. I say with full passion and conviction, I know much more can be done on this methane issue. And, like I said, environmental groups were quick to criticize it. But the Environmental Defense Fund president said that it could be the single most impactful day of announcements from any COP in my 30 years at the EDF. So I don't know what to think about the importance of it.
The Environmental Defense Fund would say that.
I was wondering I don't know what your thoughts are on them.
Look, there are a number of green groups, like big green groups that have decided to go a little bit more on the side of the strategy of like, not if you can't beat them, join them. I don't think that's like the right way to take it. But like, we have to be actively working with and giving some credit to fossil fuel companies or to polluters or to like logging companies. We need to love our enemy, work with our enemy, like give them credit. And the best way forward is like positive reinforcement, I guess, is maybe how I would put it. And the reason I said that they would say that is because I've seen EDF do that before, use positive reinforcement, and there's a strategy for that. It's not the one that I think is justifiable. Positive reinforcement, I think, is a good strategy when you have evidence that works.
Right.
And I would argue that we have evidence that it only sets us back.
Interesting. Really, leads me to a lot of questions. I don't know if you have any reporting or if anybody else has any or studies of that to kind of look at what is most effective in terms of behavioral change, in terms of legislation, policy change, the psychology or strategy that works best. Because you're saying there's room for there to be that strategy if it was effective, but we don't really see the data that it is.
Well, we do see this data that it's ineffective.
Got it.
Which is that, once again, despite knowing about climate change and the effects of a 1.5 degrees Celsius world for decades, a very long time, we've had a lot of time in order to tackle this. We have 5 years left to emit the way the world has been emitting before we breach that 1.5 degrees Celsius benchmark. Like, I can't repeat that enough. And I think maybe it's like, maybe the consequences of a 1.5 degree Celsius world aren't really like cemented in a lot of people's heads on like what that means. That is like the point at which irreversible impacts really begin. That is 80% of the world's coral reefs bleached, gone. 2 degrees, once you reach that threshold, that's 100% of the coral reefs gone, right? But that difference between 1.5 and 2, limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius and limiting warming to 2 degrees Celsius, is the difference between life and death for a lot of people and a lot of places. And they're not necessarily, those differences aren't a lot of maybe places that like an average American is going all the time, but it is some places in America. I always think that one of like the horrible ironies of this is like how terrible a 1.5 degree world is going to be for Southern Florida, for Louisiana, for places that don't consider it to be a problem. And, which is not their fault as voters, like that, because they're being fed a disinformation machine from polluting corporate interests. Like, it's not their fault. It's very sad. But it's like the evidence that including polluters in negotiations and giving them positive reinforcement, the evidence that doesn't work is the situation that we are currently in, right? Because that is the only thing that we have ever done.
It's like you mentioned, the South, Louisiana and Florida with their heads in the sand on the issue, policy-wise, and if probably polling-wise, the citizens in those states and others. But it just reminds me of the vaccination, the understanding or ignorance around vaccination, and how some experts like Dr. Peter Hotez say 200,000 people needlessly died. Had they gotten vaccinated, they wouldn't have died. And whether that number is accurate, if it's 100,000, I mean, like the point is, I feel like it's similar. Do you feel like it's a fair comparison? Because when you deny the solution, you end up, or the problem and the solution in that case, you end up being the victim of it.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the
disinformation parallels.
The juxtapositions between COVID and coronavirus, like, could not be more.
You meant COVID and climate, not COVID and coronavirus, which are the same, right. I think.
The juxtaposition of COVID and climate change are like so poignant. There are too many to count ways that they are similar. And it hit me as soon as we were quarantined in 2020, just how similar these problems were going to be. And I think what's so sad about it, like with the example that you were just talking about with COVID and vaccination, is also how many people believe that those people that didn't get vaccinated, how it's their own fault, how it's like the fault of the individual who was misinformed for making that choice. I mean, maybe I'm just like saying this as a person that still believes in the responsibility of journalism and of news organizations in a democracy. I see that as a failure of information systems, a failure of democracy to do what it is supposed to be doing, which is creating this informed, well-informed citizenry. And the fact that we have so many not well-informed citizens is not the citizens' fault. It is the fault of our information systems, and it's the fault of, frankly, a lot of corporate interests that are in control of our information systems and who are consistently misinforming the public.
I think I slightly disagree, only that, and I'd love to know what you think, like what more could be done by government or responsible journalists or even big corporate journalism to combat the fact that, and I saw this, I've been watching this trend for almost 20 years, to combat Alex Jones, Tucker Carlson, and so many of the loudest people in media that are the ones convincing people not to get vaccinated. Oh, yeah. Like, I don't know what.
I'm not saying it's like, a journalist or like the New York Times' fault per se, right? Like what I'm really blaming it on is the Tucker Carlsons and Alex Joneses, but also like the Facebook.
Joe Rogan even. I mean, Joe Rogan had a huge, I was on his show right before the pandemic, and I always had to wonder, would I have gone on and out? I don't think I could now, but like his impact was massive on that. Well, let me ask you one more. I know I got to let you go. It's good news. Here's good news in terms of your work and your journalism. You are the leading Substack newsletter on the issue of climate, independent climate reporter. You and Ariel now doing great work over at Heated.world. And now you've partnered with this really great company, Now This, who produces video content. So they're taking some of your best work, some of your best investigative articles, which get read, and then where do they go? But because they're still so relevant and so important, and they're bringing them to life with your help on video. This is really cool. You've shot a bunch of these, and just maybe tell me a little bit about it, and I'll link to it in the show notes.
Yeah, it's very cool, particularly because I don't know how to use TikTok and Instagram video because I have millennial brain. So it's been really helpful to partner with Now This, which is a video news organization that they've got millions of followers across different platforms.
Huge.
And it's been great. We've produced 10 episodes of existing Heated articles, turning them into 90-second videos. The ones that have been most successful are probably the one where we baited people into me saying that I don't think that Kylie Jenner's private jet flights make her a climate criminal. I think her beauty brand does.
Oh, that's great. It's great. I don't even remember that piece, but that's so great.
Well, the piece is essentially about the climate impacts of the beauty industry and how the beauty industry is sort of this undercovered climate problem. And so in that article, like I didn't really mention Kylie Jenner, maybe down in the piece I did, but going through that article and being like, how are we going to make that into a 90-second video for audiences that get their news primarily via TikTok and Instagram? Like, how are we going to hook them into this article? I was like, let's use Kylie Jenner in the first 5 seconds to talk about, the climate impact of a beauty brand versus the climate impact of flying a private jet. Both are bad, but we talk a lot about private jets and we don't talk a lot about the beauty industry. They're packaging in plastic that's non-recyclable, made with fossil fuel derived ingredients, the increased demand for consumerism, the sheer amount of consumerism that the world does solely for beauty product and the fossil fuel emissions that causes. If we're really concerned about climate change, we should be looking at that at least as much as the celebrity private jet issue. So it was just sort of like spewing a couple of facts about that and then driving people back to the larger article about the beauty industry and climate change, which, that was very deep into that one when I reported that one. So.
That is awesome. And if it works, I'm sure it will. I'm just going to throw the audio of that one on here at the end, and then people can go find the rest of it. Because
absolutely. That one got 600,000 views. I think that was our best one.
That's great, Emily. That's great. You're doing awesome. So is Ariel, Heated.world. I am so glad to have been on the ground floor and even before.
Hell yeah.
You back in the day, and I just love watching you grow and supporting your work, and it's so important. So
I've got something for you, actually, if you're ever in DC, or maybe I can send it to you. When are you going to be in DC next?
Well, I mean, depending on what you're giving me, tomorrow.
All right, you ready?
Oh, you got hats?
Yeah, I got 12 hats.
Oh, why do you only have 12?
Well, they're prototypes.
Oh, well, I'm a hat person as a bald American man.
Yeah, man. One of these is for you.
Oh, I'm on my way. Or you can send it to me. Either way, I need to get down there, and that's I need very little reason. We'll get those hats out too. Emily, thank you. I will let you go. I really appreciate you and your work. Tell Ariel I said hi. I'd love to talk to her again soon, and we'll talk again. Thank you.
Totally. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Emily Atkin, Heated.world. And now here is the audio, as promised, I remember this time, from that great video that she partnered with the Now This channel. And I'll include a link to it if you want to share it on your social media channels. Tell your friends. Here it is.
I don't think that Kylie Jenner's 17-minute private jet flights make her a climate criminal. I think her beauty brand does. Let me explain. Just for context, I've been a climate reporter for the last 10 years, written for a bunch of media outlets. And in that time, I've noticed a trend. The climate stories that get the most media attention are not always the most important. And it's not that it's not important. And I've written a whole story about why it's important. So if you want to know why, just check that out. But like, if we're talking about what makes somebody a full-time climate criminal, the operation of one hyper-polluting skyboat is nothing compared to operating an at least $1.2 billion business dedicated to promoting global consumerism of fossil fuel-derived products sold in plastic packaging. We rarely talk about the beauty industry like this, but it is similar to the fast fashion industry in terms of climate and environmental destruction. Think about it. Like, in addition to producing the actual ingredients, which leads to increased carbon emissions, the global beauty industry produces more than 120 billion units of mostly non-recyclable plastic packaging every year. That includes caps, lids, pumps, none of which can be recycled. Beauty is an extremely environmentally intensive industrial process, and the impacts of that process are only set to increase as demand for beauty products grows. It's not just the products themselves that I think make Kylie a climate criminal. It's also the beauty standards that she promotes that can only be attained by unhinged consumerism. The fact is, you cannot look like Kylie Jenner without buying a bunch of stuff. And buying stuff is a massive driver of the climate crisis. So yeah, well, it would definitely be great for the planet if ultra-rich celebrities like Kylie Jenner stopped riding around in private jets. It'd be much better if they stopped trying to get richer by selling fossil fuel-derived products and started using their massive influence for better causes, like, I don't know, challenging the idea that we need to buy things in order to be beautiful. And yeah, that wouldn't be the best for Kylie Jenner's bottom line, but I think it would do a lot for our collective future on Earth.
There you go. Emily Atkin working with Now This, and she continues to grow over at Heated. You should get on board. I'm shoulding you, I know. I rarely do that. I don't like to should people, but this is one to support. She's doing great work. She's got a great journalist working with her now. Ariel, as mentioned, Heated.world. Links in the show notes. Tell her your pal Pete sent you, and maybe you'll get a hat. That's all I've got for this episode of Can You Talk Real Quick. I hope you appreciated me dropping it here on a Tuesday morning during COP. I've got the resources, the time, and the great authentic talent to make these interviews happen real quick, but I can't do it without your $5 at least. So go to patreon.com and sign up right now or more. You can pay $80. You can pay $1,000, whatever you want, you can pay to support this podcast if you're getting a lot out of it. I really appreciate it, and it's a lot more than a podcast. It's become a community, too. So join us, be a part of it, and I'll talk to you later.
Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. Off of your butt, down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense.